friends of Boulder Bookstore. My name is Amber Adams, and I am the author of the poetry collection Becoming Ribbons. Hopefully, you can see that, which is out from Unicorn Press now. Thank you so much, Boulder Bookstore, for asking me to do this Q&A. So I'm just going to answer some questions. The first one was, what first inspired you to write poetry? Well, a strange story. I wrote my first poem when I was in middle school after watching the movie My Girl. I think some of you probably have seen that. But I didn't really get serious about writing poetry until I was in college, and then published my first poem when I was in my graduate program at DU. And I think it's just a medium that I've always loved and have felt a passion about. And I've had poets that have spoken to me, and I have just always wanted to communicate in that way. I know it's not a medium that a lot of people totally enjoy, but I always think that poetry, there's a good poet out there for everybody. It just, if you don't like poetry, it's probably because you haven't read somebody who speaks to you yet. So the second question is, can you tell us about the overarching themes of your poetry collection? Sure. So this collection is written in 4 acts or parts. It tells a narrative arc throughout the poems, so they're meant to be read sequentially. Some poetry collections you can just pick up and start anywhere, and this really isn't one of those. It is about my first marriage, which I was married to a Marine, and I was also in the Army at the time, and I was married very young at 19 years old. And it tells the story of how our relationship was changed by our respective commitments to our branches of service. And then my ex-husband was hit by an IED while serving in Iraq. And it's a little bit about his recovery from that injury. And ultimately, he suicided. And it is about that choice and the fallout of that decision, and how we are still affected by people even after we are no longer married to them or connected to them in any official way. So the collection moves through the trajectory of our relationship, its eventual end, and his ultimate suicide. Let's see here. So it's a lot about like the themes that come to the surface are war, trauma, love, and just it's also a coming of age kind of story. It's a lot about how we change during like our 20s, and yeah. So the next question that you have for me is, why do you think people who have lived through war often turn to arts to cope with the trauma of what they've experienced? Well, I have many theories about this because my day job is being a therapist. And I think that the arts, particularly poetry, but the arts in general, allow for some non-syntactic communication. So they allow you to communicate something without having to put it in like subject, verb, object kind of form that normal speech requires of you to communicate something. And I think oftentimes when you have trauma, it doesn't record in the brain the same way as a story would. It has fragments, or it's a little bit more splintered. And so I think that art, and specifically poetry, it kind of captures that natural fragmentation that occurs with trauma. The next question you ask is, are the poems in this collection ordered chronologically by when you wrote them or by theme? And I think I would categorize them more in according to theme. As I kind of said before, it tells a narrative arc throughout. It's not a chronological narrative, though, because I don't feel like that's how memory works. Usually it's like you have a memory and that opens the doorway into a deeper memory, or it opens the doorway into a deeper theme. The same way that like one loss will bring up some other losses for you in your life. And so that's kind of how this book is organized, and why I say that it's 4 acts or parts rather than a narrative arc, or rather than saying that they're written chronologically, because they're not. Like the next question you have is, why do you think it's so important to memorialize those who have gone? I think that that's the natural rejection of entropy that we all experience, of trying to create something that's lasting in a world that tends to churn through people and forget things. And I think we're deeply affected by those who have gone, and they inform our actions. They inform so much of how we see ourselves. And that is one thing that I struggled with quite a bit after my ex-husband died, is here was this person who I had shared a lot of individual memories with, and now I was the only one that held those memories that existed in this world. And that realization was just so powerful for me. And so why do I think it's important to memorialize those who have gone? It's part of how we show our genuine connection to each other. I think and a lot of people believe this too, that grief is an extension of love, and how we grieve is and part of how we grieve is we memorialize. That's why we have monuments and cenotaphs, and why we write elegies. It is part of how we understand loss. So the next question you have for me is, what are some of your favorite books that you read during the pandemic? I've read quite a bit during the pandemic, so but of the poetry collections that I have read, I think the noteworthy ones are Kaveh Akbar's Pilgrim Bell, Ada Limon's The Hurting Kind. Rebecca Morgan Frank also has a poetry collection called Oh You Robot Saints, which was amazing. I actually wrote a review for it that's up on the 32 Poems website right now. I also read this anthology on motherhood called The Long Devotion. That was fantastic. There's so much great poetry that has come out over these last few years. I hope you all get to enjoy it. The next question you have is there anything else you want us to know about your book? I think, this book took me 10 years to write. It was a definite labor of love. I found myself often asking over those 10 years if I was the person that should be writing this story, but and I don't think I ever really got an answer to that, except for that I just, every time I sat down to write, this was the story that was in my heart. Um, and I am incredibly grateful for some of our local writers organizations like Lighthouse Writers Group, who have these they have the book project and the poetry collective, which they give you a cohort that it's kind of like an MFA program where you are with a group of other people who are also trying to write a book, and you give each other feedback and you take classes together. It really was what allowed me to take that next step and come up with a draft for this collection. And yeah, I think other than that, I just, if you read it and you have comments about it, you can find me on social media, or you can email me. I'm at amberadamspoet@gmail.com, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it, whether there's certain poems that spoke to you or whether you hated it. I'd love to hear it. Like, tell me what you didn't like. So I think I'll close by just reading 3 poems from the collection so you can get a sense of what it's like. The poems that I'll read are from the latter half of the collection. The first one is titled Liminal. Liminal. Over 1,000 miles away, I slept in my childhood bedroom, bruised-cheeked from a wisdom tooth extraction, still tingling of painkillers. Morpheus, the god of dreams, arrived on a white boat, and I swam the river of oblivion, unaware of the chambered round or the explosion tearing through 28 years like the rip of paper. Unaware of the police reports or the bureaucracy of dying, trying to summarize or codify meaning, facts that continue to collect, up to and after your memorial, such as your ashes weighed 8 pounds. Everyone surprised at the amount. Your ashes weighed 8 pounds, same as when you came into this world, beginning and ending with the weight of infinity. Before your memorial, the lying began. At the bar, your friends talked of how you left for boot camp with a sack of apples, needing nothing other than the orchard of your own sweat. How you were a hero. Maybe that one is true if you believe a Purple Heart has the face of George Washington. They all wanted to be so close to you then. If they actually knew, loving you was like the swing of an axe, unwieldy but the arc, a force split to the very core. Then they might know how we fed the fire. The cost of flight. 7 years ago, in a house I rented briefly, where a deadbolt door led to my bedroom from outside, I could hear Morning by the meadowlark's melody. Those love-starved attention seekers never showed themselves, just called out like old relationships in the soft hue of thought. He used to say, "One day, baby, one day," and on some road of hope, the calendar days marked off like exit ramps with weeds grown over. It's true, it turns out, that birds make nests from tumbleweeds. How many homes must I vacate to learn that one day was not, as it seemed, a place to settle down, spend weekends flipping pancakes, that for us it was the air currents that pulled us onward. Suppose we stayed married after the war. Suppose that when I hear birds, I mean the whip-blade rotors of helicopters. Suppose he never died. Suppose so many never died. The thoughts go round and round. When I revolve back to it in my mind, I think of the hollowness of bird bones, empty little cathedrals where I could light candle after candle and hide out in the rafters watching wax unfold into nothing. Can a person gift themselves a future when she no longer feels it in her bones? What I thought was the direction of contradiction was actually a perfect arc. I lived in many places, a great northern migration. I started to question whether I had an aerial view of my self-dissolution. Everywhere I looked, I saw feathers. I struggled to find things each time I landed. I would unpack boxes and months later be disappointed by small absences. The tragedy of birds is their emptiness, the way every part of them is designed for flight. Aerodynamic, they never feel the weight of always leaving. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Boulder Bookstore, again for doing this Q&A. And the book is Becoming Ribbons, and it's out now. Thank you.